Hi, guys. Sorry, I missed Adam. Great, yes.
Yes, you're so good.
I guess, I started to feel in my back decided that I was participating, and so they decided that I was going out. That's fine. I saw John Wick on Saturday, and it's very good. You guys see it?
Yeah.
He for you. But speaking of John Wick, which is very entertaining, absolutely my absolute favorite thing to watch in the theater, right? I'm gonna have to ask you guys for a favor. So the president came in and spoke to you, at the beginning of this month. I know it's been a long time ago, it was before spring break. You guys vaguely remember? As a result, my public opinion lecture, you guys did not get it. My other class did not come to my other class. So I'm going to give you a Zoom version of that lecture and post the notes up, okay? So that you can look at it, for any sort of thing. I promise I'll make it like a 25 minutes. So while it will not be as exciting as Java, right? There will be no arms flying off at any point. It will not look like a video game from above the house. Okay, it's really very cute. Yeah. Right? Nonetheless, it will be short, I promise. And so this will help you have an exam next week. It's either that or I have to give you that lecture out of my day and you have to take it. So, what do you guys watch that? So today, this week, we are talking about, and you may have noticed that, there was probably last week and this week was the same reminders being up on campus. So I fixed them last week during class, or Eric did, and I'll give you a little extra time. And then Wednesday was there. You have to do this week too, okay? I gave you until midnight tonight, because I noticed this morning that they weren't up again. So you have until midnight tonight on the one that's due today, and then you have until regular time. Okay, so just a reminder. Your exam will be the same format that it was last month. It'll open at midnight, it'll close at midnight, you'll have X amount of time to do it. If for some reason, you don't see the ADRC test, and you need to do the ADRC test, send me an email, I'll figure out what's going on. It's possible you may sign up for it. I would still send that email today. I haven't opened it. Okay. But if it's Saturday, Friday, Saturday, and you don't see that yet, right? Okay, today we're going to talk about participation. And one of the things I want to point out is how you vote in these states. And every single state is different. So this is how you can find your registration. This is how you find out if you are actually registered. You can also go to vote.org and enter your zip code, and it will take you to see if you are registered. And I want to talk about two things about voting. All right. Number one, in the last Oklahoma statewide election, that was just this month, can anyone tell me what % of registered voters voted? 30%. 30%. So some of you may say, yeah, Oklahoma sucks. I can't believe they didn't legalize marijuana. So, how many of you voted? 4, 5, 6. So maybe you vote. Right? When we talk about other things, like statewide elections, the last statewide election in the state of Oklahoma, 6% voted. In the presidential election in 2020, Oklahoma had the lowest voting rate of any state, at around 54%. If you think that voting doesn't matter, then guess what? Your vote doesn't matter. The people who do vote, their vote matters. Right? This is the easiest form of political participation. I'm not saying it's perfect. There's some problems. You guys read about some of the obstacles to voting status, right? But this is the easiest form, and it is the form in which more people participate than any other. So whenever I say, okay, look, in the last statewide election, 30% of registered voters in the state of Oklahoma voted. There are more people voting than doing anything else. How many of you say, well, I don't vote, but I do other things? Raise your hand. How many of you vote and do other things? Okay. When we talk about political participation, understand that number one, the easiest thing to do, the thing most people do, and in Oklahoma, it's still really different. Actually, throughout the South, it's really different. Now, there's some reasons that have been pointed out for this low political participation. About 25 years ago, Bob Putnam writes his book, Born Alone. I was a graduate student at the time, and I had some conversations with him about it. And he makes a point, okay? In the 1800s, there was a person by the name of Alexis de Tocqueville who toured the United States and wrote a book called Democracy in America. Has anybody heard this book or Tocqueville one? Do you know what Tocqueville says in memory of it? Yeah. You have to find. He points out a couple of things, the English kind of system of law is part of it, right? Also the fact that colonies, remember when we were talking about the founding, that colonies had a tendency to self-govern a bit. All the town halls made a difference. But these town halls also did something else. They created a nation of joiners. In other words, people join things, right? They sign up for fun. He noted how many people play recreational baseball. He also noticed there was a very large middle class. Again, a lot of this based on the fact that people have resources that they pull together in these groups and maintain strength for the middle class. And so, three things. Back to the founding, what we were talking about, the town halls, the kind of history of being involved in local politics and joining things, people being joiners, and also this middle class. And so, Putnam is going to focus quite a bit on this question of the joining. How many of you have ever bowled? How many of you have been in a bowling league? 3? That's more than last time. That's deeper. Okay. Right. So I would say something like 80% of you said you're bowled. 3 of you have been in a league. Right? This wasn't the way it was. My grandmother, I have distinct memories of her in 1970. My grandma and grandpa had a bowling night. We go out on Thursday. We go bowl. And this is pretty standard. That people join bowling leagues. How many of you play any sort of recreational sport? Softball or Intramural. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of you, okay? All right, pretty low, actually, I'm surprised by that. How many of you are a member of a campus organization? More, okay, good. How many of you are members of a community organization or like an organization where you get to meet? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, again, pretty low number. Okay. Saying, hey, look, one of these things that these groups did is they created something called social capital. This is the first question I asked when you're kind of focused questions. And social capital are these norms of reciprocity and trust. And they help build reciprocity and trust in the community and in the country as a whole. Okay? So social capital, building social capital. It was one of the things that, whenever I was a graduate student, I was having this conversation with my graduate students last week about the fact that it seems like there's very little social capital among the graduates. Whenever I was a graduate student, it's something we talk about all the time. We go through this thing because this is how we build social capital, right? It was part of what we talked about. And so social capital is because it is actually work for resources. But it does other things too. So for example, my next door neighbor is Bill and Mark, who I like very much. They're in their 70s. We have literally nothing in common. They're Cubs fans, I'm Yankee fans, right? They like basketball. I prefer football. I think softball is a great sport. They don't go watch it. Ideologically, politically, we're on different ends of the spectrum. But Bill and Barb and I have a pretty good relationship. So, for example, if they're going out of town to go watch spring training for the Cubs, I went to their house, right? And I learned the same thing here. I have a key to their house. They have a key to my house. When I brought my foster baby home, they came over with cards and gifts and said, anytime. We have absolutely nothing in common. We don't agree on anything really. And we really like it. Okay. One of the things about social capital is starting with that relationship with those neighbors. I built other relationships in my neighborhood. My neighborhood has like a little forested area. By forest, kind of off the woods with walking trails. Where there's been 8 years, bottom once. Untrue. Right. But this is Oklahoma and things happen. Right? So for example, if we have a windstorm and it's trash day, what happens? All the trash goes everywhere and usually in the common area. If people walk their dogs, we have some certain norms. What are the norms to walk your dogs? What do you need to do? You need to pick them up, right? Right? And so we have a neighborhood Facebook page that occasionally touches people who fail to pick up. Right? We have norms, trust, and reciprocity. And so when the little wooded area is full of trash, twice a year, we say, hey, it's spring cleanup, let's go out. Nobody has to go, but people go. They put on gloves and waders, grab some big. The boys is great. Because we say, hey, look, we're gonna see each other all the time. We're gonna build this trust. And so we're gonna pick up our space. We're gonna be held accountable for it. Even with voting, a couple in my neighborhood are the poll workers at my polling place. And they shout out on the Facebook page, hey, okay, day, we're here. And when you walk in, they go, oh yeah, hey, neighbor. So it kind of takes care of that problem of free riding too. People feel guilty if they're part of a group and they don't. Right? They feel obligated. There's a duty to each other. Someone was telling me about the shopping cart philosophy of good and evil, right? And that's kind of the same thing. We build social capital when we put that shopping cart. We don't get anything out of it. Right? There's nothing, nobody's going to give you an extra quarter once they're all being 50 quarter back, right? Nobody's going to say, hey, way to go when you put the shopping cart back. It's expected. But people do what? Even the part you put the shopping cart, right? But they don't, we think what? That was that person. Lazy, right? What? Sometimes you decide to make sometimes, right? So civic participation and volunteering is going to build it's going to build ties between people that would not normally have ties to one another. The title is going to document its decline. 25 years ago, whenever I talked to him, we were talking about, he said, you know, the internet just doesn't provide any way for people to go community. No, you know, it's new. 25 years ago, it's new. But my brother is on various and assorted threads and chat rooms and such. I'm back on their chat room. Anybody remember chat room?
MySpace.
AOL. My brother is various things, other chat rooms. So, you know, I think it could be something. And so, social media, does it create, do you now have communities that are formed through social media? How many of you say yes? Right? How many of you think maybe, however, social media is more destructive? A few. How many of you think it could be both? Yeah, right? Because the thing about technology and things, both good and bad. And so when we talk about social capital, we're also talking about things like social networks. So you guys are at the University of Oklahoma. You're right here, right? And 3 years from now, you have a job in Chicago. Okay, so I'm going to sit in you a few of these things. Right? You have a job in Chicago. And it's game day weekend. And you want to go watch football games. Where are you going to go? Do you know? You're probably going to find out where the OU club is meeting of Chicago. You're going to go to that bar. Right? By the way, Derek, don't work. And so you're going to go to that bar and you're going to hang out, and you're going to watch the game, and maybe you're going to meet somebody. Right? You're probably going to talk to somebody. You're there, all of you are here. Feels nice. You're going to connect, and you're going to build social networks that are outside of your immediate employment, your immediate family. And that's going to be linked together by the fact that you're a student. So you went to OU club. But is that there's not a lot of people who actually go to universities that have OU clubs or similar clubs in cities, right? Or only 33% of people actually get a college degree. A little less than 50% go to college. And so that sort of community isn't available to everybody. When we talk about how we learn about these networks and how we start building these social networks, we have to think broader than college. Now, this class absolutely is meant for this purpose. I told you guys at the beginning. That's the entire purpose of this class is to teach you to be, right? Have you guys done anything in labs that you thought would be helpful for that? Learning how to be a citizen? Some people are going to be upset if you can't answer that question. It's going to be this, right? Anything. Anything you did in the workbook, anything you've done to help you be a citizen. Oh, there's so.
50-page paper due on Friday.
You guys got anything? Yeah.
So it's learning how to like start out in government, learning what it means to be involved in the government itself, not just, you know, being a citizen, but formulating a government, how you do it first.
So our very first episode, our very first lab, where you guys had a zombie apocalypse, right? And you had to form a government, right? What about work where you had to look up your representative? Has any of you guys ever, who of you knew who all your representatives were, the local, state, federal level? 1, 2, 3. Still, one last time, there's only one. Right? So for the rest of you, hopefully you learn, hey, this is who I contact. Right? That's part of it. Anything else? All right. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, you discussed different political parties, but what did you do? Learn how to do. Something you learned. Not okay. Did anybody take the ideology quiz and find something different than what we thought? Nobody? That's all it's surprising. Right? Had anybody ever formed an interest group before? Have you guys thought about the media and what we're being biased by before? Not that you're thinking about. All right. So college courses are one possibility. The other thing though, and this is important, is that high school students, how many of you took a government class in high school? Oh, a lot more. My last class literally had 3 people who did government class. How many of those were AP classes? 1, 2, 3, 4, about 20, 18. So those of you who are in your high school who did not take an AP government class, but took a government class, raise your hand. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So those classes, was available to people not those. Right? So the AP classes, those were college-bound people. So if we're talking about people who are getting a high school education, which as I pointed out was the majority of people, right? Then what do they learn about how to be a citizen? What do they learn about that? Peter Scotchwell points out that they used to not necessarily learn these things in high school. Instead, they learned them in a different place. They learned them in civic organizations, right? Broad civic organizations. They come to large swaths of population across class lines. And we come back to these. So you'll hear first. These are the ones she found. there were actually this group right here, over 70% of Americans belong to one or more of these groups. And these are the biggest groups. At least 1% of American men, women, or adults, you know, sometimes they were mixed, sometimes they were women, sometimes they were mixed, were in each one. That's big numbers, right? And if you say these are large groups, and they have an interesting structure. There's a local structure, state structure, and a federal structure in each one of these groups. So you might be a member of the local chapter of the Red Cross, and you might elect representatives, and then there's going to be a state chapter and a federal chapter. Was the Red Cross particularly political? No, not particularly political, right? But people learn how, or socialize how, to participate in a democratic process through joining the Red Cross. Not only that, but they were in a membership organization with people across classes. So I'm a member of one of these, or I was, the Benevolent and Protective Order of Health. After I became a lawyer, I went back to my hometown. My father said, hey, you're a member of the community now. You need to join the health club. So I did. And I was pinned by my father. They said, John Huckabee, do you bring blood here? He said, yes. Okay. Very excited. Sorry. But the point is this particular group of people had what? Do you guys know what the Elks Club generally does?
Thank you.
Any grandparents or parents of the Elks Club? Well, they give give scholarships for people for a basketball shootout. It's open to everyone, right? So they give scholarships to high school students. They do some community events, right? They also do some conservation. Well, for the most part, they just kind of meet, hang out, drink, have dinner together a couple times, have dates, so. But the Elks Club can be filled with people who are working class, middle class, shop keepers, bakers, and a lot of the local political aspirations are going to start in the Elks Club, or the Chamber of Commerce, or the Rotary Club, right? All of these places where people are going to build support and get to know each other, and then they're going to have an openness to community as a whole. With this list, is there anything that either you or one of your parents or grandparents or members? Anyone?
YMCA.
One? No Boy Scouts of America? No American Legion?
The YMCA, but
YMCA? No? Okay. YMCA? So, if we look at this, that's going to start with a question. When we talk about social science, it's important, right? When we talk about social science starts with a question, something that can, right? I wrote my dissertation based upon a question I had my first year as a graduate. Okay, so her question is, how do we make the United States fairer and more democratic? How do we make it fairer and more democratic? Because with the growing inequality in income and political voice vote, since the 1980s, the middle class has been shrinking rapidly, while people in poverty have been increasing. The gap between the rich and the poor is widening. We talked about last week when we talked about lobbying and money, the impact of money, and the fact that that's creating an unequal voice for those with more. Access to college is more difficult, right? How many of you have heard an older person say, well, I worked my way to college, I don't see why you need to be doing anything.
Good.
That wasn't even true whenever I was in college. Okay? That wasn't even true then. And so that's a little out of touch, right? Access to college has become much more difficult. So you start with this one. Because, hey, in the past, we had a lot more membership in these large civic organizations. In particular, these national ones that had a national level, a state level, and a local level. People learned how to be citizens because they cared about, you know, the Boy Scouts of America. Or because they want to go to the Moose Lodge. Right? And it's not that they became politically active because of that. They were in these clubs for different reasons. But it taught them how to be citizens. So the impact is this. There's cross-class participation and cross-class science. Nations come from all walks of life. Right? The women's suffrage, the Anti-Slavery Association, all walks of life. And so people were having conversations with people that they would not normally associate with. As I said, there are less people at the local level, and maybe those people are being recruited to run for city council or state representative. And so they're connected to them because of that. They're not recruited from elite places. They're not recruited from groups that are outside of where the lower and middle classes are being out. They end up broadening participation so they enhance citizen vote. You know, when we're talking about lobbying, and you guys were a little skeptical, I would say, of how good or bad lobbying could be. I mean, here's a great example of really impactful and broad-based lobbying. Following World War II, the U.S. Congress said, hey, there were a lot of men who were promoted to officer in the field during World War II. We should give them a chance to go to college because an officer has to have what? College degree, right? So we give them a chance to go to college. So we're going to create a bill that gives money to those who were promoted to officer in the field. And the American Legion, which is a group of veterans, representing groups of veterans at the local level, the state level, the national level, says, you know, that's not enough. That's not enough. There needs to be a way for anybody that served to go to college and get a degree. And the GI Bill, the number one reason for the massive expansion of the middle class in the 1950s, that it made college accessible for people from poor and middle class backgrounds. It's a big difference. And it's because the American Legion says, nice thought, Congress, then how about all of it? Right? Because the American Legion wasn't built for officers only. The American Legion was built for everyone, both officers and enlisted. So look at this group again and think about that. Now, the American Bowling Congress, the General Federation of Women's Clubs, right? These are not necessarily things that you see today. But some of them are, some of them are left. So tracks diminished democracy because with the decline of these large membership associations. And you'll be happy to know this is the fault of the boomers. Right? And then here's the fault. It's their fault. Stay here. Okay? They basically said, we're way too cool to join the music club. We're not going to do that. What we care about is this one issue. And so let's just send some money for that. And so, as you know, both Eric and I are members of the Pacific Whale Foundation. Perfect example of that. I don't have to go to meetings. They send me an email once a year and say, hey, you want to renew for a new snowball? Sure.
Do they have meetings?
I don't meet anyone. Right? How many of you are members of that type of advocacy or? One? It's just about the same level. Stop me again, join
We need more people protecting the whales.
They will. But then this is textbook democracy, so we start thinking that this is how we participate. And then, as people get wealthier, they leave their town, they leave their neighborhood. Succession of the successful. They build gated communities, HOAs, and they move away from their neighbors that are across town. They stop being involved in their local community. Okay? And we can see that in cities as well. As you guys know, I come from Pryor, Oklahoma. This is important because Pryor, Oklahoma was the home of Jock Mayer. You guys heard of Jock Mayer? Of course you have. He was a recluse who saved all his money in jars in his jar. For the most part. When he died, he left it all to Pryor. There was lots and lots of land. He bought us lots and lots of land. And it was millions, tens of millions. He's not the only one. The Grahams did the same thing and built an orphanage for Pryor. And so, if those people who are maybe active in the community and giving back to the community philanthropically leave, what does that mean? In one generation, the old civic world disappeared. By the 1980s, the boomers had killed it. It really is. Consequences are pretty big. Government is less responsive to average citizens. We pointed this out last Tuesday. Legislation is less responsive to the economic needs of non-professionals. In 2009, the Recovery Act response was not focused on jobs but banks. We had a big recession in 2009. The game of the banks, not people. What about 2020 and 2021? Who got relieved during the epidemic? What? Homeowners? Okay, homeowners, who else? Corporations, absolutely. Who else?
Taxpayers,
Taxpayers
check.
did get a stimulus check, so that was broad based, absolutely. Okay. Who else? People with student loans, substitute loans for that was nice. Right? Is that everybody? Who got the bulk of that? Corporations, PPP loans, they didn't have to pay back. Yep. Private business owners. Okay, people who had gone to college. Everybody got something. But some people got much, much more. It's also led led to polarization in politics, and I want you guys to take this away as a particular theme of this past section. We talked about polarization in terms of the media. You guys are gonna hear my lecture on public opinion and hear a little bit more about polarization there. We talked about it with interest rates, role of money and polarization, parties and polarization. I would suspect that polarization in politics could be an essay question on your next rather, right? We talked about it in every single one of these sections. This is a math topic. So how do we revitalize politics? You know, there have been some things put forward, you know, this idea of leaders who will devise new models of association, build networks of chapters and affiliated groups. We talked a little bit about how Black Lives Matter was formed in this way, chapters of affiliated groups rather than a centralized location.
Oh, the Pacific Whale Foundation has a whale film festival.
The Pacific Whale Foundation has a whale film festival. Another possibility are tax and election reform. This is your last question, your last question. Tax incentives for membership groups. The only membership groups that currently get tax incentives are, can you tell me? Churches, right? Only religious ones is going to get any sort of tax incentive there, completely tax exempt. All religious institutions. But membership institutions aren't. Right? And so therefore, you know, there's maybe less incentive, or maybe you get a tax incentive for joining. That's possibly. National election holiday or easier registration, either one of those things. The idea is there's a national holiday on the second Tuesday of every other November. Doesn't mean that is possible. Right? Seems like a good time. It's always tough the first week in November.
Do we register people to vote in here?
We have registered people to vote in here. And there's a way to also get the next credit, I believe, in this section on this exam, if you register to vote and post something like that. So Eric, will you put in the
Yeah.
after they're here to. The code is here.
Hold on.
Yeah. APRE, Eric Solution.
Mostly.
Current display of money, we talked about that a little bit, you know, how do we do that? Do you fully fund a campaign? Do you limit how much can be spent by corporations? What do you do? Fixed gerrymandering, we're gonna talk about gerrymandering in the presidential vote, the electoral college in the next section, right? Well, they may know what gerrymandering is, you don't have to know yet. But can they know? Yeah. Okay, it's where they draw lines, not even on counties, but around precincts in order to ensure that a party wins over another party. Right? We can see this in Oklahoma in Congressional District 5 is a great example of that. The electoral college is a possibility. We'll talk about that next month. All right. And how many of you, are any of you computer software engineers? One. I only had a few. It's really surprising. Okay. But can social media be re-engineered? I mean, because it kind of does, like I said, it's not like my neighborhood Facebook page doesn't have a place, right? When you hear things happening, check the Facebook page, keep happening. But can it be re-engineered to create new forms of civic association rather than civic institution? How do you do that? So as a review, right, we talked about social capital, trust and network facilitating cooperative enterprises, service learning how to actually do things, right? I actually filmed a TikTok video, and they're not allowed to
I think the quiz, hold on,
Did you give them a chance to say here or not here?
yeah, I put it in the wrong, it's under assignment quizzes right now, I'm trying to fix it.
He said it's up there, but there are no choices.
I just put the choice up.
Okay. Refresh your page, otherwise it won't work. Okay. We're putting the choices.
Hold on.
Service learning, practical civic engagement, and tax and electoral. Well, these are 4 ways to approach this. If I were to ask a question, right? As an essay question, how we cultivate participation, I would want you to answer that question with these 4 things, but I would want you to be able to tell me which one you think would work best. Right? Seems like a good question. Alright. So, I'm sorry I'm kind of low energy today, my back is still doing me, but I am sitting off the ride. And so, until Wednesday, over.
Yeah, I didn't before, I don't know what to do, I think. Figure out why it's. Questions. Okay. You've done it, like, you've done it. Yeah.
I'll make sure.
We're having some issues.
Like, that's that clock.
Yeah, I'm working on it. Well, there's some issue on campus. Oh, you're gonna get a lot. It won't let me put it.
This one. Again.